The dimly lit office hummed with the low buzz of fluorescent lights, casting a sterile glow over stacks of files and surveillance equipment. I sat at my desk, a government agent with the weight of national security on my shoulders. My name is Agent David Mitchell, and every day I navigate a labyrinth of classified information and covert operations. But today was different. Today I received an assignment that would haunt me forever. The email came through at 10:13 a.m., the subject line reading simply, "Urgent Operation Review Immediately." My heart raced as I opened it. Inside was a dossier detailing a recent surge in unexplainable phenomena across the country. People were disappearing, and those who returned spoke of dark figures, whispering voices, and a strange, overwhelming dread that clung to them like a shroud. As I scrolled through the reports, I was struck by the uniformity of the accounts. Victims described shadowy shapes lurking in the corners of their vision, a persistent feeling of being watched, and a pervasive sense of impending doom. The patterns were too consistent to ignore, and the government needed answers. I pulled up a map of the affected regions. They were scattered across the country, but a cluster formed in the Midwest, a small town named Eldridge. My instincts told me I needed to go there to investigate firsthand what was happening. With a firm resolve, I packed my gear, a sidearm, a digital recorder, and a notepad for jotting down observations. As I grabbed my jacket, the weight of unease settled in the pit of my stomach. Driving through the sprawling countryside, I noticed how the landscape changed. The further I got from the city, the more desolate it became. The fields seemed to stretch endlessly, the corn stalks swaying eerily in the wind, and the sky overhead darkened with ominous clouds that rolled in from the west. It felt as if I were entering another world, one that had been untouched by time or civilization. Eldridge was small, more of a dot on the map than a proper town. As I pulled into the main street, I noted the dilapidated buildings and faded storefronts. A sense of abandonment hung in the air, thick and oppressive. I parked my car and stepped out, the crunch of gravel underfoot echoing in the silence. The town seemed empty, but I sensed eyes upon me, hidden behind curtains and cracked doorways. I approached a diner that looked slightly more alive than the others. The neon sign flickered uncertainly, casting an eerie glow over the cracked pavement. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and grease. A few patrons sat at the counter, their heads bent low as they whispered among themselves, casting furtive glances in my direction. "Can I help you?" the waitress asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She had sunken eyes and a hollow expression, as if life had drained from her long ago. "I'm here to investigate the recent disturbances in town," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "Have you noticed anything unusual?" Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw fear flicker across her face. "You shouldn't be asking questions. People, they don't like it. Best to keep to yourself." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "They're watching, always watching," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "You'd do well to leave before it's too late." Ignoring the warning, I ordered a coffee and took a seat at the corner booth, determined to gather information. As I sipped the bitter liquid, I couldn't shake the feeling that the diner was a microcosm of the town's paranoia. The conversations around me grew hushed as I scribbled notes, each scrawl echoing my mounting dread. I overheard snippets of conversation, hushed tones speaking of disappearances and strange sightings in the fields. "It's the shadows," one man said. "They come at night. You can feel them creeping closer." The unease thickened, wrapping around me like a fog. I realized I needed to confront whatever was lurking in Eldridge. I finished my coffee and stood to leave, but the waitress caught my eye, her expression pleading. "Be careful, agent," she whispered. "You might not be alone." As I stepped outside, the air grew heavier, the sky darker. I headed to the local library, hoping to find historical records or accounts that might shed light on the current situation. The library was an old brick building, its windows dusty and dim. Inside, the air was musty, filled with the scent of old books and forgotten knowledge. I approached the librarian, a frail woman with thick glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. "I'm looking for information on Eldridge, specifically any unusual occurrences or historical events." She eyed me warily, her fingers trembling slightly. "People don't come here for that," she said, her voice a mere whisper. "They come to forget." "Forget what?" I pressed. Her gaze drifted to the window, where shadows danced at the edges of my vision. "The town has a history. Dark things happened here, things that should stay buried." Intrigued, I pushed for details. She sighed heavily and motioned for me to follow her to a back room filled with archives. As we sifted through dusty files, she revealed tales of a cult that had once thrived in Eldridge, practicing dark rituals beneath the full moon. They believed they could summon something ancient, something that dwelled in the shadows. "The town burned them out decades ago," she said, her voice shaking. "But their legacy lingers. Some say they still come back, whispering in the night, waiting for the right moment to rise again." A sense of foreboding settled over me. I felt as if I were unwittingly opening a door to something that had been best left closed. The librarian leaned in closer, her breath trembling. "Whatever you do, don't go out at night. The shadows are not what they seem." With the sun beginning to set, I decided it was time to gather my thoughts and prepare for whatever lay ahead. I returned to my car, the chill of the evening seeping into my bones. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. As darkness enveloped Eldridge, I knew I had to stay vigilant. I drove to the outskirts, seeking a vantage point that would allow me to observe the town without drawing attention. I parked near an abandoned farmstead, the dilapidated barn looming in the shadows. From there, I could see the flickering lights of the diner and the faint outlines of houses nestled against the darkening sky. The silence was palpable, but as the hours passed, a strange feeling began to seep into my mind. A sense of being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the old barn sent my heart racing. I gripped my sidearm tightly, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. It was then that I heard it, a low whispering, barely discernible, drifting through the cool night air. I strained to listen, but the words were just out of reach, teasing me with their unintelligibility. I could feel my pulse quicken, the adrenaline surging as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. It felt as though they were beckoning me, calling me to step closer to the shadows. I shook my head, trying to dispel the growing sense of dread. "It's just the wind," I told myself, but deep down, I knew something was very wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of dark slipping between the trees. My instincts kicked in. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the car, the beam cutting through the darkness. I moved cautiously, the whispers continuing to echo around me. My heart raced as I approached the edge of the woods, the trees looming like sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" The whispers ceased, replaced by a heavy silence. I took a step closer, the beam of my flashlight illuminating the underbrush. Shadows danced around me, twisting and turning in the light, but there was no one in sight. I felt exposed, vulnerable in the open air, and instinctively took a step back. Just then, a chill swept through the air, a coldness that felt almost alive. I turned quickly, scanning the area for any sign of movement. My flashlight flickered, the beam dimming for a moment before sputtering back to life. Then, from the depths of the woods, I saw it, a figure cloaked in darkness, standing just beyond the reach of my light. It was too far away to make out any details, but I could feel its gaze boring into me, a malevolent presence that sent shivers down my spine. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the fear rising in my chest. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it took a step closer, revealing a glimpse of pale skin and hollow eyes that seemed to reflect the moonlight. My heart raced as I fumbled for my weapon, the fear consuming me. I took a deep breath, steadying my resolve. "Stay back," I shouted, but the figure continued to advance, an unnatural speed that left me frozen in place. The whispers returned, louder this time, swirling around me like a tempest of dread. In that moment, I knew I had stumbled into something far beyond my understanding. Eldridge was not just a town with a dark past. It was a place where nightmares coalesced, where shadows came alive. I turned to run, adrenaline surging through my veins, but the shadows seemed to reach out, pulling me back into the darkness. I sprinted toward my car, heart pounding in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to escape, to put distance between myself and the sinister presence lurking in the woods. As I stumbled back onto the gravel road, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The figure was still there, its features obscured, but I could feel its gaze piercing through the night, searching for me. I fumbled with my keys, the metal feeling foreign in my trembling hands. Finally, the lock clicked open, and I dove into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I fumbled with the ignition, praying the engine would roar to life. It did, but the sound seemed almost too loud in the oppressive silence of the night. I glanced into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure right behind me, its hollow eyes glowing with malice. But there was nothing, just the vast darkness pressing against the edges of the town. I tore out of the farmstead, tires screeching against the gravel. As I drove back into Eldridge, the familiar streets felt alien, the shadows seeming to stretch and twist, mocking my fear. I needed answers, and I had to find the source of the darkness that haunted this town. I parked outside the diner again, the neon sign flickering as if signaling some hidden message. I took a deep breath and steeled myself for what lay ahead. I had to confront the townspeople, gather information, and understand the nature of the threat I was facing. Inside, the atmosphere was even tenser than before. The patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting to me as I walked in. The waitress met my gaze, her expression a mix of pity and concern. "Back again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you," I said, urgency creeping into my tone. "What can you tell me about the figure in the woods?" The whispers. Her expression darkened. "You should have listened. They don't want outsiders poking around." I gripped the edge of the counter, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I'm not leaving until I know what's going on. People are disappearing. I need to understand what I'm dealing with." She hesitated, glancing toward the back of the diner as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. Finally, she leaned in closer, her voice trembling. "It's the spirits of the cult, those who were sacrificed. They're angry, restless, they want revenge on this town for what was done to them." A shiver ran down my spine. "What do you mean sacrificed?" "They believed they could summon something powerful, something from beyond," she said, her voice barely audible. "When the townspeople burned them out, the ritual was interrupted. Now they linger, seeking those who disturb their rest." My mind raced with the implications. If the shadows were indeed manifestations of the cult's anger, then I had to tread carefully. "What do they want?" I asked. "Revenge, blood. They want to reclaim what was taken from them," she replied, her voice shaking. "And if you're here, you're a target. They can sense you." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. "How do I stop it? How do I protect myself?" She glanced around, her eyes wide with fear. "The only way to keep them at bay is to stay in the light. They're drawn to darkness. If you're out after sunset, you're inviting them in." The implications of her warning crashed over me like a tidal wave. I was a government agent, trained to deal with threats, but this was unlike anything I had encountered before. I had to get to the bottom of it, to find the source of the darkness, and put an end to it before it consumed me in the town. I left the diner, the whispers of the townspeople echoing in my mind. I decided to head to the town archives, hoping to find more information about the cult and their rituals. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows darted in my peripheral vision, and every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. The archives were housed in a small, brick building at the end of a narrow street. I parked and stepped inside, the musty air wrapping around me like a cloak. Old newspapers lined the walls, yellowed with age, and the dim lighting added to the eerie atmosphere. The archivist, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, looked up as I entered. "Can I help you?" "I'm researching the cult that once operated in Eldridge," I said. "I need to know everything you have." He regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Most people don't come looking for that kind of history. It's best left forgotten." I pressed on, determined. "I need to understand what's happening. People are in danger." With a heavy sigh, he gestured for me to follow him to a back room filled with dusty tomes and records. As we sifted through old papers, he began to recount the history of the cult. They believed in an ancient entity, something they could commune with through sacrifice, he explained, his voice low. They gathered under the full moon, performing dark rituals to summon it. When the townspeople discovered their activities, they took matters into their own hands. I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine as I read through the records. The details were grotesque. Accounts of rituals involving blood and darkness, the townspeople's fears manifesting in a violent confrontation. "And you believe their spirits are still here?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The archivist nodded gravely. The cult was never truly eradicated. Their whispers linger in the night, and their anger festers. Those who disturb their peace invite their wrath. The weight of his words pressed down on me as I absorbed the information. I had to act fast. As night approached, I knew I had to confront the shadows, to find a way to quell their rage before it consumed the town. I thanked the archivist and stepped back into the waning daylight. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a sense of foreboding settled over me. The town was quiet, too quiet, and I could feel the oppressive weight of the darkness creeping closer. With the night settling in around me, I realized I had little time to prepare for what lay ahead. The whispers from the woods beckoned me, tantalizing yet terrifying. I had to find a way to communicate with whatever lingered in the shadows, to understand its desires and quell its anger. I drove back to the farmstead, the darkness enveloping the landscape. The barn loomed ahead, a black silhouette against the moonlit sky. My mind raced with possibilities. If the cult had performed rituals to summon this darkness, perhaps I could use the same methods to confront it. I stepped out of my car, the air thick with tension. I approached the barn, its wooden doors creaking ominously as I pushed them open. Inside, the scent of damp earth and decay assaulted my senses. The moonlight streamed through gaps in the wood, illuminating the space in a ghostly glow. In the center of the barn, I found remnants of what looked like an old altar, stones arranged in a circle, charred remnants of previous fires scattered across the floor. The atmosphere was charged with an unsettling energy, and I could almost hear the echoes of past chants vibrating through the air. I rummaged through my gear, pulling out a small emergency kit that contained candles, matches, and a few items I thought might serve as offerings. As I set the candles in a circle around the altar, I could feel the air grow heavier, the shadows pressing in around me. The moon was full tonight, and the time felt right. I lit the candles, their flames flickering as if in response to the unseen forces surrounding me. I closed my eyes and concentrated, trying to clear my mind of fear. Instead, I envisioned the ritual the cult had once performed, what words they had used to summon their entity. "Ancient ones, hear my call," I began, my voice steady despite the rising dread. "I seek to understand your plight, to know why you linger in darkness." For a moment, nothing happened. The air felt still, oppressive, and I almost doubted myself. But then, as if responding to my call, the shadows around me began to shift. The flames of the candles flickered violently, casting long, distorted shadows that danced against the walls. "Show yourselves," I demanded, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "I am here to listen." Suddenly, the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony, a dissonant chorus that clawed at my sanity. It felt as though the very walls of the barn were vibrating with their fury. I clutched my head, trying to block out the noise, but it seeped into my consciousness, threatening to consume me. "Why do you haunt this place?" I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. "What do you seek?" A darkness pooled in the corner of the barn, thick and palpable. I squinted into the shadows, my heart racing. From the depths emerged a figure, shrouded in darkness, its form shifting and twisting as if it were made of the very shadows that surrounded it. It stepped closer, and I felt an overwhelming chill wash over me, an ancient sorrow radiating from its essence. "You disturb the rest of the forgotten," it whispered, a voice like the rustling of leaves in a long-abandoned grave. "We seek vengeance for the sins committed against us." I fought to maintain my composure, reminding myself that this entity was once human, a victim of the town's wrath. "I'm not your enemy," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm here to understand, to help you find peace." The figure hesitated, its dark form swirling like smoke. Peace is a luxury denied to us. We were betrayed, our blood spilled for the sake of ignorance. What can I do to appease you? I asked, desperation bleeding into my words. What do you require? Blood must be paid for blood, it hissed, the darkness thickening. One must be offered in penance. A cold realization settled in my gut. This was not merely a plea for understanding, it was a demand for sacrifice. I felt the weight of my mission as a government agent clash with the reality of what I faced. I could not let fear control me, I had to find another way. Can't we find a different path? I implored, trying to reach the humanity within the darkness. There must be a way to break this cycle without more suffering. For a moment, silence enveloped the barn. The entity loomed, its form flickering, caught between rage and sorrow. You speak of a choice, it murmured, its voice a haunting echo. But choices come with consequences. The blood of one must cleanse the sins of many. As the whispers surged again, I felt my resolve waver. I needed to protect the town, to prevent any further loss of life. If a sacrifice was necessary, perhaps I could offer myself as a means of negotiation. Then take me, I said, my heart pounding. I'll be the offering you seek. The figure recoiled, shadows writhing in confusion. Your life is not what we desire, it hissed. We wish to reclaim what was taken from us. We demand a soul from Eldridge. I realized then that I was merely a pawn in this twisted game, a means to an end, but not the answer they sought. What if I can bring someone? I proposed, a spark of desperation igniting within me. What if I can find one of the townspeople willing to confront their guilt? The shadows hesitated, and I could feel the tension in the air shift. You seek to bargain, it whispered, curiosity lacing its tone. Yes, I said, my heart racing. Let me gather the living, those who hold the weight of the past. If they are willing to confront their actions, will you relent? A low growl rumbled from the entity, the air thick with uncertainty. We will give you this chance, agent. But know this, failure will not be forgiven. The darkness pulled back, retreating into the shadows, leaving me shaken and gasping for breath. I knew I had little time. I had to act quickly before the shadows reclaimed their hold. With the darkness retreating, I scrambled out of the barn, adrenaline surging through my veins. I had a task to complete and failure was not an option. I needed to rally the townspeople, to bring them face to face with their past before the entity grew impatient and claimed what it believed was rightfully its. I drove back toward the center of Eldridge, my mind racing. I knew the townspeople were gripped by fear, but perhaps they could be convinced to confront their collective guilt. If they could acknowledge their sins, there might be a chance to sever the cycle of vengeance that had ensnared the town for decades. As I parked outside the diner, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. The flickering neon sign bathed the area in an unsettling glow, and I stepped inside, the familiar scent of stale coffee filling the air. The patrons looked up as I entered, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. I approached the waitress first, her expression a mixture of worry and determination. I need your help, I said urgently. The darkness in this town, it's not just a story, it's real, and it demands a sacrifice. She paled, the color draining from her face. What do you mean? It wants someone from Eldridge to confront their past, to take responsibility for what was done, I explained. We need to gather everyone willing to face the truth, to acknowledge their role in the cult's downfall. She hesitated, glancing around the diner where the other patrons whispered amongst themselves. They won't listen to you, she said, fear lacing her voice. They're too afraid. Fear is exactly what keeps this cycle going, I replied, urgency creeping into my tone. We need to break it. Please, rally them. I'll explain everything. With a reluctant nod, she slipped away to gather the townspeople, leaving me standing in the diner, the weight of my mission heavy on my shoulders. I could feel the shadows lurking just outside, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim their due. As the townspeople trickled in, I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the confrontation ahead. They murmured amongst themselves, exchanging fearful glances as I stepped onto a makeshift platform at the back of the diner. Listen to me, I called out, trying to project confidence despite the fear gnawing at my insides. I know you've heard the stories, the shadows, the whispers. They're real, and they demand justice for what was done to them. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. "It's just an old tale," one man scoffed. "We've lived with these stories for decades. They're not real." "But they are," I insisted, locking eyes with the man. I confronted the darkness. "It wants one of you to acknowledge your role in the past. It wants a sacrifice, but there's still a chance to break this cycle. We can't let fear dictate our lives any longer." The tension in the room escalated, and I could see doubt flickering in their eyes. "You want us to give ourselves to the shadows?" a woman shouted. "What if it doesn't stop?" "I'm not asking for a sacrifice," I explained. "I'm asking for accountability. If we confront our past, we can find a way to appease the darkness without bloodshed." "But who would take the blame?" another voice called out, laced with bitterness. "We all have blood on our hands." "Then let's face it together," I replied, my voice steady. "We need to come together as a community to confront our guilt and acknowledge the wrongs committed against the cult. It's the only way to cleanse the shadows." The crowd murmured, some nodding hesitantly while others remained skeptical. I pressed on, drawing from my own conviction. "I'll stand with you. We can face this together. It's time to stop hiding in fear." Finally, the waitress stepped forward, her voice steady. "I'll go. I'll confront what I did, what we all did. We can't keep living like this." As she spoke, a wave of resolution washed over the crowd. One by one, others stepped forward, voices rising in agreement. "We can't let the past define us any longer." With the townspeople united, we gathered in the heart of Eldridge, under the full moon. I led them back to the barn, the air electric with anticipation and dread. The shadows awaited, eager for their due. As we stood together, I lit the candles I had brought, forming a circle around the altar. The townspeople hesitated, but ultimately followed my lead, their collective fear and guilt palpable in the air. I raised my voice, addressing the shadows. "We come not as enemies, but as those seeking to right our wrongs. We acknowledge the pain we caused and the darkness we unleashed. We ask for your understanding, for a chance to cleanse this town of its haunted past." For a moment, there was silence. The air thickened, and I could feel the shadows shifting restlessly around us. I glanced at the townspeople, their faces etched with fear and determination. Then, from the depths of the darkness, the figure emerged once more, a swirling mass of shadows and sorrow. "You dare to stand before us?" it hissed, the voice echoing with the weight of ages. "What makes you worthy of our forgiveness?" "Because we acknowledge our sins," I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. "We're here to take responsibility for the past, to confront the pain and suffering we caused. We're willing to pay the price, not with blood, but with accountability." The figure hesitated, and the whispers around us grew louder, swirling in a cacophony of rage and sorrow. "You think mere words can absolve you?" "No," I said firmly, "but we can begin to heal. We must be willing to face the truth, to embrace the darkness rather than cower from it." With that declaration, I turned to the townspeople, encouraging them to speak their truths. One by one they stepped forward, their voices trembling as they recounted their actions and the pain they had caused. The woman who had first spoken up admitted her fear had led to the cult's downfall, her voice choked with remorse. Others followed suit, confessing their roles in the violent expulsion of the cult members, their faces etched with guilt and regret. As the confessions echoed through the barn, the shadows began to shift, the entity lingering on the periphery, absorbing the weight of their words. "You seek redemption," it whispered, a glimmer of doubt creeping into its tone. "Yes," I affirmed, my voice unwavering. "We seek to reclaim our humanity, to face the darkness together. It's time to break the cycle of vengeance and pain." The whispers quieted, the shadows pulsing with uncertainty. Slowly, the figure began to dissolve, the darkness receding into the corners of the barn. "Perhaps there is a chance for peace," it murmured, its voice echoing with a mix of sorrow and hope. In that moment, I felt a shift in the air, a lifting of the heavy weight that had pressed down on Eldridge for so long. The shadows retreated, their hold loosening, and I could see the townspeople exhale, the burden of their past finally beginning to lift. As dawn broke, spilling light into the barn, I knew the darkness had not been vanquished entirely, but a path to healing had been forged. The cycle of vengeance had been disrupted, and the town of Eldridge could finally begin to reclaim its future, unshackled from the haunting legacy of the past.